In a quiet town nestled between small hills, there was an old music school that had been around for many years. It wasn't fancy or modern, but it had something special. Rooms filled with warm sounds, wooden floors that creaked, and pianos that had been played by generations of students. Every few months, the school held a weekend class for adults who wanted to learn piano, no matter their age or skill. On a cool Saturday morning, the large room began to fill with people. Some were in their 20s, others much older. They smiled nervously, holding notebooks and sheet music. Among them was Clara, a woman in her 40s. She wore a plain brown sweater and carried a small bag over her shoulder. She didn't talk much. She simply found a seat in the back row and quietly sat down. The instructors entered next. They were well-dressed, confident, and full of energy. One of them, Mr. Evers, stood at the front of the room and clapped his hands. "Welcome, everyone. We're excited to help you begin your piano journey," he said with a big smile. The group clapped, and some laughed nervously. As the introductions began, each student stood up and shared a little about themselves. One man said he used to play guitar. Another woman said she played piano as a child, but forgot everything. When it was Clara's turn, she stood up slowly. Her voice was soft but clear. "I've always liked music," she said, "but I've never really played." Some teachers nodded politely. One of them, standing near the back, raised an eyebrow. Mr. Evers smiled kindly and said, "You're in the right place then." The lesson started right after. Each student was handed a sheet with a simple melody. It was a short piece. Nothing too hard, just enough to get their fingers used to the keys. The teachers moved around the room, helping the students one by one. When Mr. Evers reached Clara, he noticed she hadn't started playing yet. She was looking at the sheet music quietly, not touching the piano keys. He gave a small chuckle and said, "Would you like to try something a bit more challenging? Let's see what you can do." He handed her a new sheet. It was a section from a well-known Beethoven piece, beautiful but difficult. A few students nearby looked over with surprise. Clara didn't say anything. She just looked at the notes carefully, her eyes moving slowly across the lines. "Take your time," Mr. Evers said. "Just give it your best shot." Clara nodded. She gently placed the music in front of her, folded her hands in her lap, and waited quietly for her turn. No one knew what was about to happen. They saw only a quiet woman with calm eyes and simple clothes. But beneath that quiet surface, something powerful was waiting to be heard, and very soon, they would all find out. The music room was quiet except for the sound of soft practicing. Some students were slowly pressing keys, trying to remember where their fingers should go. Others were tapping their feet as they counted beats out loud. The teachers moved from student to student, offering small tips and encouragement. Clara still sat in the back, holding the sheet of music Mr. Evers had given her. It was not an easy piece. It had fast runs, strong chords, and quiet moments that needed careful touch. It was a part of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, and most beginners wouldn't even try to play it. Mr. Evers had handed it to her with a small grin, not expecting much. Maybe he thought it would be a lesson in humility. Maybe he wanted to test her. Either way, Clara didn't seem upset. She simply looked at the music with calm focus. Her eyes followed every line. Her fingers moved lightly on her lap, as if practicing without sound. Some students nearby noticed her. A young man leaned toward the girl next to him and whispered, "Do you think she knows how hard that piece is?" The girl shook her head and smiled. "I don't think she'll make it past the first line." In the front of the room, one teacher was helping a student with hand position. Another was clapping out the rhythm for a nervous beginner. No one paid much attention to Clara anymore. They thought she would struggle just like everyone else. After a short break, Mr. Evers clapped his hands again. "Let's take turns playing a few bars of your piece. Don't worry about mistakes. This is just for practice." One by one, students walked up to the piano. Most played slowly and carefully. A few forgot notes and had to stop. The teachers gave warm smiles and kind words, even when it wasn't perfect. Finally, it was Clara's turn. She stood up quietly and walked toward the piano. The room felt more silent than before. A few students leaned forward to watch. One teacher crossed his arms, ready to listen. Clara sat on the bench and took a deep breath. She adjusted the sheet music, placed her fingers on the keys, and waited for a moment. Then she began to play. The first few notes floated gently into the room. They were soft, clear, and full of emotion. Her fingers moved with grace, not too fast, not too slow. The sound was smooth, as if the piano had suddenly come alive. People stopped moving. The whispering stopped. Every face turned toward Clara. The difficult parts of the song came, but Clara didn't struggle. Her hands moved with confidence, her touch light but strong. It was clear now. This was not a beginner. This was someone who knew the piano deeply. When she finished the short section, the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Even the teachers didn't speak. Clara looked up and gave a small smile. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The room was filled with silence, the kind that only happens after something truly surprising. Everyone sat still, not quite sure what had just happened. Clara had played the piano as if the keys were part of her, as if the music flowed from her heart without effort. Even the teachers were quiet for a moment, exchanging confused glances. It was Mr. Evers who spoke first, breaking the stillness. "Well, that was unexpected," he said slowly, his voice filled with both surprise and admiration. He cleared his throat and smiled. "Very impressive, Clara. I must say, I didn't expect that." Clara simply nodded, her hands still resting on the piano, though she wasn't playing anymore. She didn't look for praise or recognition, and she didn't need it. She was calm, as if this was just another part of her day. The other students sat in stunned silence for a few moments before one of them, a young woman named Anna, spoke up. How did you play like that?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "I thought you were just starting out." Clara smiled softly but didn't answer right away. She glanced at the piano, as if recalling something from long ago. After a brief pause, she replied quietly, "I played when I was younger, but then life got in the way. I stopped for a long time." The students around her exchanged glances. They were curious but hesitant, unsure how to ask more without sounding too rude. Mr. Evers, however, wasn't shy. "You played at a conservatory, didn't you?" he asked, his tone now respectful. "You've got a lot of experience." Clara nodded slowly. "Yes," she said simply, "but that was a long time ago." The teachers looked at each other, their expressions changing. Mr. Evers, still processing what had happened, looked over the other instructors. They had all been so sure that Clara was a beginner, that she would struggle. Now it was clear they had all been wrong. "We'll have to rethink how we approach this," one of the teachers, Ms. Wilson, said quietly. "We thought everyone here was just starting, but it seems we have someone with more advanced skills." Clara's quiet presence made her seem like just another beginner, but her music told a different story. She wasn't interested in being noticed or showing off. She simply wanted to play. Mr. Evers turned back to the students. "Okay, everyone," he said, clapping his hands. "Let's take a short break. Clara, why don't you join us?" The students slowly gathered their things and started talking among themselves, but it was clear that Clara was the subject of their conversations. Some asked her about her past experiences with music. Others asked how she managed to stay so calm while playing such a difficult piece. Clara answered as simply as she could, without making a big deal of it. She didn't seem interested in impressing anyone. She just wanted to share what she loved. As the group continued their discussions, Clara quietly returned to her seat in the back. She wasn't looking for attention, but it was clear that she had earned it in a way she hadn't expected. The room hummed with quiet chatter as the students gathered around the coffee table during break time. Some were still discussing Clara's surprising performance, while others were nervously tapping their fingers, unsure what to think of the day's events. Most of them had expected a calm and relaxed learning environment, but now, everything had changed. Clara sat by herself in a corner, sipping her coffee slowly. She didn't mind the attention. She had lived through enough years of silence and solitude to know how to stay calm in moments like this. Her hands rested on the table in front of her, fingers lightly tapping a quiet rhythm. The music she had played still echoed in her mind, but she didn't feel the need to say much. It was enough to just let her hands feel the rhythm. Mr. Evers approached her after a moment. He seemed a little unsure of what to say. The other teachers had gathered near the windows, exchanging opinions, but he wasn't like them. He liked to get to the heart of things. "You know, Clara," he began, his voice soft but curious, I didn't expect that. Not in a bad way, of course. I'm just surprised. How long has it been since you've played like that? Clara looked up at him, her expression calm but thoughtful. She paused for a moment, then answered, Many years. I stopped for a long time after some things happened in my life. But I never forgot the music. She looked back down at her coffee cup, tracing the rim with her finger. It was always there, in the back of my mind. Sometimes I think that's why I came here, just to see if I could still play. Mr. Evers nodded slowly. It's impressive, he said. You didn't just play the notes, you brought the music to life. I think the students here are learning more than just piano techniques today. They're learning how music can touch something deeper. Clara smiled gently at his words, but she wasn't looking for praise. I only played because it felt right, she said. It's not about being perfect. It's about remembering why you started in the first place. Mr. Evers was quiet for a moment, considering her words. He had been a teacher for many years, but he'd rarely met someone so at peace with their own talent. Most students were eager for praise or recognition, but Clara didn't seem to need any of that. She simply wanted to play. After a short pause, he cleared his throat. Well, if you ever feel like sharing more with the class, we'd love to hear it. I think they'd all learn a lot from you. Clara nodded but didn't say anything more. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for now she was content. The music was something she could come back to when she needed it, just like a familiar friend. There was no rush, no pressure. She had all the time in the world. As the break ended, the students slowly returned to their seats, their minds filled with new thoughts. Some were still looking at Clara, still in awe of her unexpected talent. Others were reflecting on their own journeys with music, wondering how much they could really achieve if they just let go of their fears. Clara quietly stood up and walked back to her piano, ready to continue the class. The others followed, some more eager than before. The day had shifted, and no one would forget what had happened. As the class continued, something had clearly changed in the room. The atmosphere was different now. The students, once unsure and nervous, were now more focused, more determined. It was as if Clara had unlocked something inside them, something they didn't even know was there. Mr. Evers continued with the lesson, but his eyes kept flicking toward Clara. He could tell she wasn't just another student. She had a depth to her, a quiet strength that didn't need to be shown off. Unlike the others, who were still struggling with basic scales, Clara seemed to understand the piano in a way that was hard to explain. One by one, the students took their turns at the piano. Some played their assigned pieces, their fingers stumbling over the notes, while others did their best to stay in time with the beat. Every time one of them played, Clara would listen carefully, nodding in approval or giving a soft smile, but she didn't comment. It wasn't her place to teach, not today anyway. After a while, Mr. Evers turned to Clara. How about you play a little more? He asked. You've got the skill. Why not share it with the class? Clara hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure she wanted to perform again, but she could see that the students were looking at her now, waiting for her to show them more. She stood up, quietly walked to the piano, and sat down again. This time, instead of playing a complex piece, Clara played something softer, simpler. It was a piece she had learned many years ago. The melody was gentle, but it carried a lot of emotion. She didn't rush through it. Every note was carefully chosen, every pause filled with meaning. The sound of the piano filled the room, calm and soothing, yet powerful. The students sat in complete silence, their eyes fixed on Clara. They had seen her play before, but this time was different. There was a sense of peace in her music that seemed to touch something deep inside them. Even Mr. Evers, who had heard thousands of students play, found himself lost in the music. He had always believed that playing an instrument was about technical skill, about mastering the notes. But Clara's music reminded him that there was more to it than that. It was about feeling, about connection, about expressing something that words couldn't reach. When Clara finished, the room remained silent for a few moments. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if everyone was trying to hold on to the peaceful feeling that her music had created. Finally, it was Anna who spoke first. Her voice was quiet but sincere. That was beautiful, she said. It's not just the notes, is it? It's the feeling behind them. Clara smiled, but she didn't answer. She simply nodded, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She wasn't looking for praise, but it was clear the students had understood. They had learned something far more important than notes and rhythms. They had learned that music wasn't just about playing, it was about expressing something from the heart. As the class continued, the students played with more confidence, more intention. Some still struggled, but they were no longer afraid of making mistakes. They were learning to play with more than their hands. They were learning to play with their hearts. As the day went on, the classroom buzzed with new energy. The students, inspired by Clara's music, were starting to take more risks with their playing. Even though they still struggled with basic techniques, they weren't afraid to try. It was as if something had shifted inside them, and they now saw the piano not as a challenge to overcome, but as a way to express themselves. During a break, the teachers gathered in the corner, talking quietly among themselves. Mr. Evers was the first to speak. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been teaching for years, and I've never seen a class change this much in one day. It's like Clara's performance opened something up in them." Ms. Wilson nodded, a smile creeping across her face. "It's not just about the technique, is it? She showed them something more." The other teachers agreed, some still processing what they had witnessed. Clara hadn't just played the piano. She had shown everyone how music could be a deeper form of communication, something that went beyond just getting the notes right. Clara, meanwhile, was sitting at the back of the room, watching the others practice. She didn't want to interrupt their learning. Though she wasn't actively teaching, her presence was enough. Every now and then, she would offer a quiet piece of advice when asked, but mostly she let the students discover their own paths. She didn't see herself as a teacher. She was simply there, sharing the love of music that had always lived inside her. Anna, the young woman who had spoken earlier, came over during the break. She looked a little nervous, but there was a determined look in her eyes. She had been struggling with a simple piece all morning and now seemed to be searching for answers. "Clara," she said, her voice shy but earnest, "can you help me with something? I've been playing this piece over and over, but it just doesn't sound right. I think I'm missing something." Clara looked up from her seat. She smiled softly, nodding for Anna to continue. Anna sat down at the piano and began to play the piece again, her hands moving slowly over the keys. Clara listened carefully, not interrupting, and when Anna finished, she spoke. "You're playing the notes correctly," she said quietly, "but you're not letting the music breathe. Sometimes you have to let the sound linger. Don't rush through it. Let it have space to grow." Anna looked confused for a moment, but Clara continued. "Imagine the music is like a conversation. You wouldn't rush through a sentence when you're speaking. You let the words have meaning. Music is the same." Anna nodded slowly, understanding. She took a deep breath and played the piece again, this time with more attention to the spaces between the notes. As she played, the music seemed to come to life. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. It had more feeling. Clara watched, content, knowing that this was what truly mattered. The music was not about perfection. It was about the emotion behind it. As the class continued, the students played with more confidence. They were no longer worried about being perfect. They were simply playing, allowing the music to flow from them in its own time. And Clara, sitting quietly in the back, smiled as she listened. She had given them more than just piano lessons. She had given them a deeper understanding of what music could be. The following weeks flew by, and the once quiet music school had transformed. Students arrived each day with a renewed sense of purpose. Their playing was no longer filled with just mistakes and frustrations, but with excitement and discovery. Each time they sat at the piano, they seemed to approach the keys with a fresh perspective, as if the music had begun to speak to them in a way it hadn't before. Clara, though still a quiet figure in the background, was becoming a kind of silent guide for everyone. She didn't need to say much. Her presence alone had sparked a shift in the class. The students had learned from her how to approach their music with patience and emotion, something they hadn't thought about before. They no longer just played the notes, they felt them. One afternoon, as the class was finishing up a session, Mr. Evers called everyone together. He was holding a piece of paper in his hands, and there was a look of excitement on his face. The students gathered around him, curious. "Everyone," he began, his voice filled with energy, "I have some exciting news. We've been invited to perform in a small recital next month. It's a chance for everyone to show what they've learned." A ripple of excitement spread through the room. Most of the students had never performed in front of an audience before. The idea of standing on stage, playing for others, made some feel nervous, while others were excited at the challenge. Clara, however, remained silent, her face calm as always. She wasn't sure how she felt about the idea of performing in front of others again. It had been so long since she had played in a recital, and part of her was content simply listening to the others. After the announcement, the students began talking among themselves, discussing what pieces they would play. Mr. Evers walked over to Clara, who had been sitting quietly in her usual spot. "Clara, would you consider performing?" he asked gently. "I know you haven't played much since you joined the class, but it could be a great opportunity for you to share your music with others. You've taught the class so much without even trying." Clara looked at him for a moment, thinking. Performing in front of others had always been a personal thing for her. She had stepped away from it years ago for reasons she hadn't shared with anyone. Yet something about Mr. Evers' words made her pause. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about sharing the music that had always been inside her. "Maybe," she said quietly. "I'll think about it." The rest of the class continued to buzz with excitement, but Clara's mind was elsewhere. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take the stage again, but the thought of sharing her music, not for praise, but for the love of it, began to feel less daunting. As the day came to an end, Clara stood up and walked toward the door, but before she left, she turned to Mr. Evers. "I think I'll play," she said softly. Mr. Evers smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'm glad to hear that, Clara." And with that, Clara walked out of the room, the decision made. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she was ready to share her music again. The day of the recital finally arrived. The small concert hall was filled with families, friends, and even a few strangers who had come to enjoy the music. The students, dressed neatly in their best clothes, walked nervously around the backstage area. Some were adjusting their hair, while others were pacing back and forth, trying to calm their nerves. The air was thick with anticipation. Clara, as usual, was calm. She sat quietly in a corner, her hands resting in her lap. She had chosen a piece she hadn't played in years, a song that had always brought her comfort. She didn't feel the need to impress anyone. She simply wanted to play. But deep down, she knew that this was a moment of personal significance. It had been a long time since she had performed in front of an audience, and it was still hard for her to shake the feeling of vulnerability that came with it. Yet, the desire to share the music inside her was stronger than the fear. As the concert began, the first few students took the stage, each playing their pieces with varying levels of skill and confidence. Some stumbled through the notes, while others played beautifully, their nerves turning into something powerful. Each performance was a small step in their growth, and the audience cheered and clapped after every piece, offering support and encouragement. When it was finally Clara's turn, the room seemed to pause. There had been whispers among the audience when she had first walked in, as many knew she was the quiet woman who hadn't said much throughout the course. Now, they were all curious to see how she would perform. Clara stood up from her seat, walking toward the piano with a steady pace. Her movements were calm, unhurried. She sat down at the bench, her fingers resting lightly on the keys for a moment. The room grew silent. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, but she focused only on the music. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her with a sense of peace. And then she began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, but as the melody grew, so did her confidence. The music flowed from her hands, the sound filling the room with warmth and emotion. Each note was carefully placed, but not forced. It was as though the piano was speaking to the audience in a language they all understood. Clara didn't rush through the piece. She allowed it to breathe, to speak on its own. The audience, drawn in by the beauty of her music, sat in silence, their attention fixed on her. When she reached the end, the final note seemed to linger in the air, carrying the emotion of the entire piece. For a moment, there was no sound, just a feeling that seemed to fill the room. Then the audience erupted into applause, their hands clapping in appreciation. Clara sat still for a moment, taking in the warmth of the applause. She wasn't seeking approval, but it was comforting to know that her music had connected with others. She stood up and bowed slightly, offering a quiet smile before walking off the stage. Backstage, The students gathered around her, their faces full of admiration. That was amazing, Anna said, her voice filled with awe. How do you make it look so easy? Clara simply shrugged, a gentle smile on her face. It's not about making it easy, she said quietly. It's about letting the music speak. As the recital continued, the students felt more inspired than ever. Clara had shown them that music wasn't just about technique, it was about heart, about sharing something real with others. And for the first time, they understood what it truly meant to be a musician.